Hey everyone, I'm going to show how I mount a bowl blank to my lathe today. I exclusively use a worm screw on my Vicmark chuck. For pieces up to 16-18 inches, I'll leave this jaw size on. If I'm going to turn something really big, I'll put a larger jaw on. It just gives you a little more surface area. Probably not needed. I always use the tailstock for support, and I highly suggest that you do the same. It cuts down all vibration and gets rid of almost any danger that would happen. So I've got a big cherry blank here. A couple different ways to do this, obviously. Anything bigger than 16 inches, I use a compass. I think I mentioned this in a previous video. It's made by lathe. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's made in France. I'll spell it. It's L-A-C-I-B-L-E. They are built like a tank. They'll go up to about 20 inches and they fit a carpenter's pencil, which is fantastic. Normal school pencils, the lead's just thin and it tends to break. That doesn't happen with carpenter pencils, so I love this for that reason. That said, most of my production work, I have these plywood plates that I have in 1/2 inch increments up to 16. The hole in the center, super simple. Throw it down where you want it. I'm using a lumber crayon. You can use a pencil, a Sharpie marker, sidewalk chalk. Those all work fine. And then just drill out the center. If you don't know how to do this, you could always put a piece of tape to use as a depth stop, so you're not drilling too far. I can just see on the drill bit how far I always drill. For a thinner piece that's not a bowl, so if you're turning a platter, I'll show you once I get this on the lathe how I would do that. Still using the same worm screw method. So at this point, I can either rough this out with the chainsaw, just go around low straight lines until it's a rough circle, or use the bandsaw. As a production turner, I use the bandsaw. It's, it cuts a lot of time out, a lot of impact on my body. But if you are setting up a shop and you don't have a lot of money, I would skip the bandsaw and just use a chainsaw for as long as possible. The bandsaw is nice, but it's not needed. So anyhow, I'm going to cut this out and then I'll show it mounted to the lathe and we'll go from there. I wasn't going to cover it, but I figured it'd be a good chance to talk about bandsaw blade selection if you do have a bandsaw, and a little bit of safety stuff. So I have tried many different bandsaw blades. My favorite by far have been the Timberwolf brand. This one's a 2 tooth per inch. I don't like it. I usually get 3. They didn't have any. They were on back order for a couple months, so I got 2s just because they had them. I don't know how to explain it. It's just a very aggressive cut. The 3-tooth model just cuts smoother. That said, once this is starting to get dulled a little bit, it's actually cutting closer to how I prefer it, which is a little odd. So anyhow, I'm going to cut out a bowl blank. So you'll see the first 2 cuts I make are straight. I don't always do that, but this log is a little bit bigger and there's some salvageable firewood on that outside cut, so those 2 long strips will be firewood. The corners that I cut off after to make a round go to a couple friends that are always needing firewood, so it all gets used. If you have a big enough piece of wood and you're cutting off big strips on the outside, they may be salvageable for some other projects, but there's just not enough meat left, so they'll be firewood. But anyhow, the biggest important thing for me when you're using a bandsaw is when you're pushing, you don't want to be pushing your hand directly into the blade. So you always want to be keeping in mind where your hand's going to go if your hand slips or if something happens. Bandsaw is such a safe tool as long as you're just careful around it. So anyhow, I'm going to cut this out, show you, and then I'll get it mounted to the lathe. bowl blank cut out. I'm gonna mount it to the lathe. So this worm screw, I believe it comes with all Vicmark chucks. It might just come with kits. It's been so long I don't remember. But you know, I know that they sell separate worm screws that aren't a chuck. I just think it's best to not have, you know, extra tools that you don't need or spend money you don't have to. So I think you can get one of these for most chucks, but I prefer Vicmark. I just think that they're made a little better. I like their jaw selection, but you know, one way makes a good chuck. I have a couple of them. Mostly I have Vicmarks. So anyhow, the screw, yep, there we go. So anyhow, the screw just goes into the chuck. Super simple, it's rock solid. Occasionally I'll screw up and bend one of them, but usually I can just hammer them back into a semi-straight shape. Super simple, so just turn on the lathe, relatively low speed, and allow it to thread right onto the piece. And once that's mounted, tailstock for support. And she's not going anywhere. All right, so alternatively, if you have a platter or something a lot thinner that you're gonna turn, you still wanna use the screw, you can just make yourself a spacer. It's just a piece of plywood, a chunk of scrap wood, drill a hole in it, and it effectively shortens your screw. So anyhow, I hope this helps everyone. Next up, I'm going to cover sharpening of bowl gouges and the bowl gouges I use currently and the grinds that I use. So anyhow, everybody, stay tuned.